Hello and welcome to my cellar. Shall we? Have several more things to address this week, so we'll get right into it. Tim, did you ever have any guidelines or rules you stuck to when making dungeons? Not necessarily dungeon dressing or placing monsters, but just the layout of the dungeon itself. Well, I don't know if you call them rules or more like rules of thumb. I tried to envision the terrain that the original building above ground had been built in, and then if it's on a conical built on top of a large hill, well then the lower levels could get bigger and bigger as they went down into the hill, which had a greater girth at its base. I like to use where it was built also to go up and down following the contours of, if it was an old mine, well then you could just go crazy following the ore. If it was something else, following the contours when it was being built as each successive layer down was dug out and excavated or whatever. Again, it really depends on, okay, if you're talking about a dungeon, underground chambers that may or may not contain things, all right, how many of those are there likely to be? Now, if you're talking about the dungeons underneath medieval castles or some of the good literature about that time, well then you'd have a veritable warren underground, and some of those can be fun. If I was doing it, say, under a temple, well then it would probably be only 1 or 2 levels below, because that all would have had to have been excavated after the temple was built above, which would be really dangerous stuff when you figure out pressures and all that things. So I just tried to let the terrain dictate how I built them and in what configurations and whether or not they were. Yeah, again, it's what were the underground areas built for? Were they the underground halls of a race of dwarves or a tribe of dwarves or clan or however dwarves band together, family? When it came to gods and clerics in your games, what kind of relationships did they have? Were the gods just there to simply supply spells? Well, it's answer prayers in my game. Or did you have them interact or make demands of your clerics? And then there's a second question: what used to be your favorite snack and drink to have with you for our game? I never felt, and I still don't feel it necessary to go deeply into the clerics deity relationship, except that it's there. I assume, again, now a beginning cleric is one thing, and has to learn what's done, but in my world, clerics don't say spells, they say prayers. And mainly what I've done in the past is, if somebody had done something mildly out of character or against alignment or against the wishes of their deity, which again I didn't care if they named or not, it didn't matter. It was dealt in a much more abstract fashion in the old days, before we put out gods, demigods, and heroes and deities and oh god, all that stuff. the biggest use for a deity was as a club to reward bad behavior, or in this case, punish bad behavior. If a cleric did something overtly that was out of line, out of bounds with their the rough outlines of their theology, then things might happen. You might have to go on a quest to get back in favor, or suffer these debilitating abdominal cramps forever and ever. It might not, if the deity, if there was a good relationship, meaning that the player character had not done anything egregious for a long time, they might just get, a warning or not. Again, it would depend on whether or not their deity was likely to be looking in on them at the time. I handled it in a roughly vague way. I was never real comfortable getting into made-up deities. I was okay with pre-made stuff, the Norse and the Western European and the Central and all of that stuff, and the various gods of the Americas. What used to be my favorite snack and drink to have with you for a game? Well, way back in the day, it was probably Pepsi or Dr. Pepper. And as to snacks, nothing orange, or nothing you couldn't wipe your fingers with on a napkin. Or if it was orange, like Doritos and stuff, well, then it was a given that I had to share, and so everybody had napkins and whatever. Now, my favorite snack today is once a year at GaryCon, one game I do is the pie game. And all the players of that game, whichever one I decide it's going to be at random, we all eat cherry pie. Now, that's a hell of a snack. Nowadays, depending upon how many I've had that day, it could be a Mountain Dew, it could be a sparkling ice caffeine. Generally, especially at the beginning, if I'm getting ready to run a game, something with a little jolt. I normally drink for these things, and other times I normally drink sparkling ice with caffeine, because that's what my sponsors provide. But they provide that because I told them that was my favorite flavor. But nothing beats a Dew. The rest of the time I drink caffeine-free, sugar-free flavored water. Okay. Yes, Tim, you are correct. What I really meant to say is that the 5th edition is the safe space of 2nd edition AD&D. Then 5th edition D&D is the maternity ward of 1st edition AD&D. This is interesting. From experience, I think that most people who play 5th don't want their PCs to die, so most dungeon masters will err on the side of caution to make sure that the players don't die. In my opinion, dungeon masters in 5th have become a type of roller coaster operator, children's book narrator, and if they stray away from that mold, then they are just bad dungeon masters. By the way, I hear that they want to get rid of the word dungeon master because it's racist. I don't know. Racist? Anyway, in my humble opinion, first edition was the best for those who want a more fun, hardcore, gore, violence, and hardship experience. First edition is where you want to go. Well, I agree. It can be buckets of blood. Now, I am puzzled here. I don't know how Dungeon Master is racist. Um, all the dungeon masters running RPGs today are not all white males. Far from it. So I don't see where that black-white dichotomy comes into play, or even a brown-white. Anyway, I won't dwell on that. That's just silly. Now, it might be kinky slash sexist in, BDSM, but I don't think anybody thinks we're playing that either. I hope to God not. Okay. I was confused about the term DC, as in the comic books. It's a term from the new D&D, third on, I think, that stands for difficulty class, basically a target number, roll this or higher on D++ modifiers. Well, okay. If I understand this, difficulty class is how hard is something you want to do. I would guess that stepping over a puddle that's only 15 inches wide is probably a difficulty 1, and pole vaulting across a 30-foot chasm would be up there around 9 or 10, if I understand this right. Or, I don't know, 19 or 20 if you're going to run the full spectrum. Again, I don't like the idea. I personally do not like the idea that some things you automatically know what your odds are going to be. I don't like that surety. I think that DMs should be allowed to be capricious, or, as we were discussing earlier, show a little displeasure with the play of their groups when they're attempting feats of daring do. That's just the way I feel about it. But there should be more uncertainty. Life is not certain. If you drive to work 5 days a week, you figure, I'm going to make it back and forth 10 times this week. Well, statistically, probably you will. But some poor sucker provides those statistics for automobile accidents, injuries, and deaths. That's why I think the later editions taking out completely sanitizing, pasteurizing it flies in the face of great rewards for great dangers. All right, I've got a hypothetical here. DM has a dungeon element that PCs can't or inadvertently won't overcome. Is this an opportunity for DM to invent new plot elements on the fly, taking inspiration from the players, or is it an object lesson for the DM not to allow chance at risk of obscuring an important element or obstacle in the dungeon design? Personally, I'm all about winging it on the fly and improvising. I always have. There have been occasions when I've been sketching out a previously unmapped part of the thing 100 feet ahead of the players. They don't know that, but I'm okay. The Wheel of Blame that I run online, best $75 you and 6 of your friends could ever total. That's you and 6 of your friends could ever spend. Anyway, it's all about improvisation. And I'll be talking more about it a little later on another question that deals with it. But I think a good dungeon master does use an opportunity when they go a little off the beam and it's not so egregious that they fly into the event horizon or never seen again. Yeah, it's a great way to. Maybe up to that point it hadn't been quite going well in your opinion. You weren't happy with it. Fine, cut loose and let them have a part in crafting the story. They don't have to know that. You can craft the story around what you're hearing them mention and things in passing, and do it right from there. There's always a risk as a DM that you're gonna for some reason a vital clue is not going to get found, no matter what you do. Now, if it's a vital piece of the puzzle that is your campaign or whatever they're involved in for a period of time, then I absolutely advocate that the DM move up somewhere else they haven't been yet, or they're in danger of, they're in proximity of, or coming to very soon. That's only you knew that you did that. The scroll they gotta find that has a piece of information, whatever, put it somewhere else. You can't be so clever that you can't. You can say as a DM when you set this up, put out 4 of those identical. And as soon as one anywhere is found, the others just disappeared and nobody knows about them. That's one way to make sure that they get vital clues or translations or something like that. Only you know as the DM. I don't believe you're cheating anybody. They found what they needed. What you needed for the story to continue. What they needed to help interpret the story. That's the way I look at it. I think as DMs we can always learn new tricks. Sometimes by what our players do, and sometimes from what our players don't do. I like the idea of fighters wielding hammers. What kind of magical enchantments or powers do you give hammers? Well, everybody's got, good old Mjolnir or whatever you pronounce Thor's hammer. And of course, in the very early days, we all wanted a +3 hammer because it came back to you. Hammers are, in real terms, they're very effective against chainmail and leather just because of the concussive damage. They're also, and now, and let me clarify, what we would consider a hammer to be, flat on both ends for pounding stuff. Now, if you're going to get into war hammers, that's a whole different ball game. So they have a point. There are so many different kinds of war hammers, and they're more for dealing. The later ones are for dealing with plate and mail armor to go in between to puncture, whatever. But for hammers, I like a dwarven hammer, a dwarven war hammer. That type of hammer that is produced for smacking things and people and creatures. I would give them, because I don't deal with crits and all that, I would give them the same damage range as an axe. And up that, if they're fighting against someone in plate, a monster that's covered with a carapace, for the possibility that the concussion damage can crack, or in the case of the armor, cave it in. All the dwarven characters I ever played carried hammers. Just a quirk. And as to powers, well, hammers because so many people look down on them, are a great way to spread some magic into your campaign. And once people find a couple of magical hammers or enchanted hammers, whether they have powers or just hit harder, or some of them could give you can give a hammer an attacking bonus, a defending bonus, specialized bonuses against certain things. I just think they're a fun weapon, and of course, if you're talking about not the specialized hammer, but the dwarven smiths or a human smith's type of hammer, that's a weapon that a cleric can use, because it's like a mace. It isn't designed to draw blood. Now, when you hit that orc in the top of his head and all that red stuff squirts out his eyes and his ears, well, you didn't draw it. Okay. In your opinion, did old D&D proliferate the idea of tank, damage dealer, healer as party positions? And did you intend to? Well, this is a long question, so I'm going to go through it in bits. In the very beginning, there were only those three. You were a magic user, you were a cleric, or you were a fighter. And so back in the earlier days, there was the majority were fighters. If you're lucky enough to have two clerics in your group, that would generally involve a rather large group, somewhere between 7 and 10 players. If you were lucky enough to have two clerics, okay, you had two medics. Generally, except for very large groups, there were generally seldom more than one, occasionally two magic users. So, yeah, pardon me. Magic users were the mortars or the howitzers, but they, of course, had no defenses to speak of, so they were guarded. You put a big arrow catcher, meat sack, and we call them lots of things. You put one of those up in the front, particularly. A couple of those up in the front. If you got that luxury, one or two of them in the back. And then the clerics and the magic users and other specialists are generally in the middle. Now we're talking about a marching order. How they deploy and everything, all those kind of tactics is totally up to the group. But there wasn't a lot of variation. Those were it. You were a fighting man, which is what fighters were originally called. You were a magic user, or you were a cleric, and that was it. There was nothing else. So it was inevitable that it would evolve along those lines. So if you had a party of 6 or 7 or 8, and we tended to play in bigger parties back in the 70s and early 80s, you wanted to spread those duties around. Being a successful meat sack was a great way to get lots of experience points and promoted faster. Sometimes taking hits and defending the party was just as good as killing the things that were attacking the party. You had to protect the magic user because they had, even when they were tough enough to get a fireball or a lightning bolt or something like that, they were still so weak that one good fireball close to them took them out, and you lost your artillery. All right, we'll go on. Did we intend it? No, it intended itself because that's all there was. What was the entire idea behind the division of the general classes and going further into subclasses? And why have those at all? Well, I have very distinct opinions on subclasses. Why anybody needs 8 kinds of crusaders is beyond me. I'm perfectly happy with a fighting man, magic user, cleric, druid, ranger, thief. And that's about it. Because those are the generally accepted and practiced professions, legal and illegal, in the period when the games are generally set, the fantasy era, which are generally set. I don't like all the other proliferation. There's half this and part of that, and bard, pardon me. Yes, because believe me, if you make it as a bard in first edition, you are one all-around badass. Don't need all that other stuff. Crusader's just a fighting man with an agenda. It's up to the DM whether or not he wants to have him have a special relationship with his deity, and whether the deity grants him anything like, extra bonuses or whatever. I don't know why to have, classes. Classes, I think you need to be able to experience points in classes are intertwined and can't be separated, in my opinion. Why don't I prefer abilities? Because I don't think that you should just, okay, it's time to do, it's time for me to go out and find fruit in the jungle. And I have a 65% ability score for finding fruit in the jungle. Well, what if there isn't any fruit in the jungle? You got 65% chance of not finding fruit in the jungle, don't you? So it seems to me to be silly. I'd much rather have them roll against stats and whatever my mods are for whether or not there's a lot of fruit in the jungle or not very much fruit in the jungle. And I know it's a silly example, but a lot of silly creeps into some of these funny arguments. To you, what are the major differences between old school play and the more new style of play? Well, I think the major one is that everybody expects that they're not going to die. And the players start with way more bonuses and edges and pluses and everything than it was just, okay, roll up some stats, you're level 1, you got a rusty pick that you brought from your grandpa's mine, and that's what you're armed with, and let's go have fun. No. Now you're an illegitimate son of an aristocratic dragonborn, so you therefore have all these innate abilities dealing with fire, and then the maid upon whom you were sired happened to be the lost relative of so-and-so who also had these powers, and holy crap. Didn't think that was what it was about. Thought it was average Joe guy, girl, player, going out, making their way in the world and becoming a duke or a duchess or whatever, and retiring and doing it all over again. The fun was in the struggle. That's the main thing. So much emotion invested that when a character died. Well, I do read the other, I read other edition threads on Facebook, and part of that's coming up later too. That'll be the not suitable for work part. And I've seen silly, spurious arguments that if more than one player dies in a per 2 or 3 adventures, then they're a bad DM. This is what players are saying. So I see that as a big, big difference. If you like playing it, as far as which are both fine, if you like playing it, fine. Some people like to play cards, other people like to play chess, some people like to play mahjong. Whatever you enjoy playing is fine, because the whole purpose is it's a leisure pursuit, though some people forget and kind of make it their second life. And it's supposed to provide you with serotonin, make you feel good, give you a sense of achievement, have some fun, however that's achieved. All right. What does role-playing mean to you and why? Well, role-playing is when you assume the role. It's no different than when I was doing school plays in the 9th and 10th grade. Okay, I'm Edgar Marr. No, don't remember. Anyway, House Without Windows, that was the play. And so I became that person, and I spoke the lines that he was supposed to speak. Now, in this case, I get to write my own lines, but I have assumed the persona of a player, of a player character. That's what it means to me. Did it ever change for you or for Gary over the years? I couldn't speak for Gary because there was a long period of time that we were not in touch with each other. Has it changed to me? Well, actually, I have more fun doing the Wheel of Blame, which has a basic bare elements of a backstory, and then everything's about the chapters that we make up on the spot. Play without a backstory. My Wheel of Blame has no backstory except that for whatever reason you've been assigned to achieve this or die trying. You either decide to do it on your own so you can boast to people that you've done it and in the game terms get, a buttload of experience, or somebody far more powerful than you has coerced you to go do it. That's the backstory. That's it. They're all playing pre-gens, 5th, 6th, 1/7, and we make it up every time as we go. Well, I make it up and they play through it, but I make it up based on the elements that they give me before the game starts. So, yeah, I love flying by the seat of my pants and ad-libbing the game. Love it. But that said, if a bunch of people, said, "Hey, run one of your published, games for us, would you?" Sure, I'd do it, and depending upon the circumstances, maybe more than just once. I don't know. Depends on who the people were. Anyway. I was wondering, what is your opinion on commercially available campaign settings? B, what did you think of Gary's Greyhawk setting be released as a product to purchase? C, do you think a campaign setting, commercial or scratch built, can be more important than the RPG rules themselves? The last one I asked, knowing that the answer can vary from group to group depending upon taste. I see no problem whatsoever playing in a prepackaged, published adventure. Now, I do have one caveat for that. Provided it's well done, and by well done I mean well written, and doesn't go bending and warping the rules of whatever game it's purported to be written for. Sure, why not? We used to envision putting out, like the Giant series would be off over in the mountains in everybody's campaign world. The Giant series would be over here, and something else would be over there. And we wanted people, and Judges Guild was all about plugging stuff in to exist, filling worlds. Some of the Judges Guild stuff, and I could not tell you who wrote what from back then. Some of it was quite good. And great. We wanted more of that material out there than we could produce ourselves because it would sell more product for us and it would build the interest in the hobby. I don't have a problem. Again, provided that it's well written. How do you know if it's going to be well written? Well, I wouldn't buy, unless you know the author that's done other stuff and you get into a Kickstarter. I wouldn't do anything until I was able to see it part of it in a PDF or whatever, so I didn't have to invest a ton of money, and expect to get a couple of dogs if you buy enough, because some have internal consistencies that you'll never know are there until you run into them. But then again, if your skill as a DM, you don't have to follow what's professionally printed. You can erase whole areas and add in new ones on your own. We always encourage people to put more of themselves into it, especially the DMs who are crucial to our hobby. Put more of themselves into it. Adapt, lift, borrow from wherever they could. It's just, I found a new die over here and I learned, and you find 3 new dies. Well, certainly dye your wool with those 3 new colors and weave a new tapestry. Create a new pattern. Do I think a campaign setting can be more important than the rules themselves? I don't know that you can separate the two. I can't imagine that every rules set will easily accommodate every adventure written. I can speak from personal experience. When I write the overall outline shell bit, I write and I create from the perspective of tail end of OD&D and beginning of first edition. That's how I structure my encounters. That's how I decide the danger level, the threat level, and justify the reward level or not. So I do it. That's how I do it. I don't think you can really separate rules from settings. The rules have to remain consistent, except when they aren't. On my world of Makanda, there are places where the magic has been leached. Like half a county places, or a grove in a forest places, where the magic has all been leached out. Don't need to explain why it is. And there's other places where it's all been, it's accumulated, and it's more of the energy that magic uses to do what it does, mana, whatever. And I like to use the form, the concept of mana. And so in the leached out one, you can barely get a campfire going with a fireball spell. And in the really heavy one, you might scorch everybody's eyebrows and mustaches off trying to light the fire with a normal light of fire level fire spell that has an unexpected release. So, I don't know. My world, I've created my world the way I wanted it so that I could do things in it that I wanted to do. Okay, here's one. Long may your beard grow. Well, actually, only this part because I shave everything else off now. About every 10 days or so, I get it with a straight razor. In the meantime, I just keep it trimmed up with one of those one blades. Yeah, okay, this is more about the DC. Do you give out any wizard pre-gen pre-gen PCs in the Wheel of Blame? No. Um, Going by my predilection for in this game, I never give the players something that they can't overcome or outwit or outsmart, because what would be the fun of that? I don't enjoy just killing player characters outright, and they don't enjoy being killed outright, unless it's a great and glorious death and everybody's laughing like a fool, which we do a lot of in the Wheel of Blame. But I don't put in a wizard because of the way that they have no concept of what's coming. They don't know what kind of terrain they're going to be in, whether they're going to be floating in the air or underwater, nothing like that. And I tell them that at the beginning of the game. These are the things you've heard about the Wheel of Blame. Well, unless I gave them an extremely high level wizard, I give them a 7th level cleric, old school 7th level cleric. I'd have to give him a wizard at least that tall, and high. There's no way he could possibly figure out what spells to bring with. It would be virtually impossible. Whereas when the group is setting out to go accomplish this and that in search of those, you have a good idea of what you're likely to need. And so therefore I don't throw a lot of, there's never a magic using human or even a humanoid. Occasionally I'll have pixies or little miniature, things that run around, and the magic just makes you tingle and singes the hair off your legs type of thing. Gulliver and Lilliputians. So I don't need one, and it's just too difficult. Now what I do with my cleric is, because he has all the prayers of the levels up to what he was able to do at 7, which is 2 firsts, 2 seconds, 2 thirds, a fourth, and a fifth. I have a friend printed up all the spells that were applicable at that period in the game into a booklet, and I just hand the cleric the booklet and say, here, I know you don't know them all by heart. Here they are, while everybody else is, doing things, skim through it so you know what you can do. It's the only book I allow at the table. No rule books or anything like that. At the table, you've got dice, a writing instrument, paper, whatever you're drinking or eating, as long as that's not getting all over the table. And that's it. So no, I don't use a magic user. I just don't see a reasonable application. I just don't. Let's see, where are we? Yes, this is the racist. Oh yeah, okay. Dungeon Master being racist. No, in this individual say more about BDSM. And he says she. I haven't. It's actually my bad old pronoun choice. I get tired of rolling my eyes when people trundle out the prurient sniggers at the mention of Dungeon Master. My pitch is change it to Dungeon Manager. No. But it is, as he says, in keeping with the ever more corporate feel of WotC. Dungeon Bunny hopping around trying to catch hold of the lasers. Yeah, there are some Dungeon Bunnies out there. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be a DM in the last 2 years of Dragon Magazine, because it seemed like every issue had a new official rules change. I know Jolly's made fun of that a bunch of times in Knights of the Dinner Table about Brian being able to quote what episode or what issue of what magazine some obscure rules came out of. And that would have driven me crazy as a DM if I had to change the rules every month. And I never would have done it But then again, yeah, that's another story. And this individual makes the argument that there are game players who have to buy the latest edition because we're in a consumer-oriented society. Just because your dad bought a 57 last year, he had to buy a 58 the next year and a 59 after that. And so they feel that they got to play the latest one. Okay, that's a very possible that some of that is what drives it. And someone pointed out that I wanted to play on RPG and Discworld, that GURPS has a Discworld RPG that was co-authored by Terry Pratchett, available from Steve Jackson Games. So I'll be looking at that online next week. All right, now I had a whole big flash of deja vu when I saw this next one. All your cellar are belong to us, Cascoid, which harkens back to the long time ago, one of the really crude space games, incredibly crude by today's standards. These strange messages and stuff came, all your base are belong to us in the game and things. Somebody had hacked it or whatever. Anyway, it was a rare flash of deja vu. Could every PC action attempt be tested with a D20 versus stat roll? If you chose, a lot of stuff is common sense. Can I walk across the campsite? Well, yeah, sure. Yeah, how gritty do you want your game to be? Which also translates as how much time do you want to spend doing silly, unimportant things? In my opinion. I think that testing should be done for extraordinary things. Extraordinary, not extraordinary, but extraordinary things. And if you have a good stat in the logical position to do that extraordinary thing, well, then you're likely to do it, and that's as it should be. If you're going to throw a 12-pound grappling hook 60 feet in the air over that branch, who are you going to give it to? Are you going to give it to the big hale and buff fighter or the little puny wizard? Okay, the wizard could try it, certainly, but I'm sure if strength was his dump stat, where he put his worst roll, well, then it's going to be less likely to happen, isn't it? Have I ever combined stats for a D20 versus stat roll PC action? No. I have generally been able, I can't remember an occasion where I wasn't able to choose one stat or the other for something they were going to try and do. Now, it might have been arbitrary on my part, but it was a number to roll against. And so, rather than just pluck a number out of the air, I pluck a number off the stat sheet, which is effectively out of the air. But it has a justification. Do I ever use stats alone without any rolls, that is, to determine the outcome of a PC action attempt? Okay, for instance, PC, Norwegian Blues, strength is 10, so is too low to muscle up to them bars? Oh, okay, if I understand this. Gary determined that 9 through 12 allows for the average human being. Not the guy that works out at the beach and rows 30 miles every week. He's over 12, obviously. And the guy that never gets out of the house, sits in his butt reading all the time, and would faint if he got too much oxygen. Okay, that's below. Sure, that 10 guy, he could go over and do a couple of pull-ups. Sure. A long time ago, Brian broke down the stats versus what it meant in real human terms. And I believe that 18 strength meant you could bench press 180 pounds. And if you believe me, if you don't work out, 180-pound bench press is no easy feat, except to very few people who are naturally muscled, heavily muscled. IQ being 90 to 120 and over that, 9 to 12 and over that. Constitution, that was a little more amorphous. So yeah, Norwegian Blue, he could still go over there and do a few pull-ups. Sure. What now in those kind of terms, my strength has sunk to about a 5 or 6, and I was probably in my heyday a 14. If the DM uses a stat but no roll to determine action outcome, could PC successfully argue for a heavily penalized roll for a lucky chance to succeed? Well, again, I wouldn't use the stat just to use the stat. I would roll against the stat and allow for the chance of the roll, the failure or the success. And if somebody's willing to take a 10% chance on doing something, if they're willing to let the dice fall where they may. And then another question, Deathless Bob and players knowing the odds. How important is an understanding of probability math for players to avoid Deathless Bob's fate of dying each game? Well, if you actually looked up the actual odds that killed Deathless Bob, they were phenomenal. 1 week, they'd be marching in a line through the mountains, and he'd be fourth in line, and somebody would pitch a rock or start a landslide, and by random choice, who got hit? Number 4, Deathless Bob. Next time, they'd be going through a dungeon, and there was a time delay trap or whatever, and I would roll a die, and it was player number 6, and that's where Deathless Bob was. So what kept killing Deathless Bob's the odds. He defied the odds. So would that have made any difference? No, because every time, it's human nature, you lose something, though you should have won by the odds, you're willing to try it again and again, because you're certain, because you lost that last one, you must make this one. It's just the odds, right? Except the odds don't change. The odds get worse and the probabilities remain the same. I think that's the way it worked. I don't remember for sure. Okay. Last 2 questions. These are the 2 that are maybe not suitable for work or children under 16. Question 1. Do you normally take a few tokes before doing these? No. I normally take 1 good one. And if I begin to lag, well, I've always got a vape. I do these ad lib, as I've explained many times. All I have is cut and paste of the comments, and I really ad lib better with a little buzz going. And when I do the Wheel of Blame, you can ask anybody that's played it in the last 3 years that I am exceedingly nimble when doing that with a mild, just a little buzz going. And then, if it's a long game at the con, maybe step outside around the middle of the game. Anyway, yeah, so I do that. I can ad lib. I'm much more agile. I actually really, really write better on a little sativa buzz. Okay, now, don't know how it got brought back to my attention, but there's another stupid, idiotic, moronic, banal, I don't know, I'll find some more words later, argument going on a Facebook thread devoted to 5e. And once again, it's about how do you pronounce boule. I gotta admit, I am continually amazed by how many people get their shorts in a bunch over this. I can't tell you how many podcasts I've talked about it. I've done it in interviews. There's chunks of an interview I did for Dorks of Yore a few years ago where I went over it. And what knocks me out is that self-appointed linguistic experts are saying, you can't do it like that, you have to say it like this. Well, what kills me is it's a made-up language on my made-up world. And when I have frequently, it's been shown frequently, that in coming up with the name, all the influences that were there, I want to make fun of the French. And the French had a lot to be made fun of at the time, and they still do, especially when it comes to language, because of their official government thing that you can't call something a hamburger, it has to be called les patties of meat or les croissants or whatever in French. Anyway, so I wanted it to sound French. I spelled it the way I did because it had been unofficially known as the bullet, small b, not large b, small b. And there's people over there arguing, and somebody will post a reply, and they'll put down, they'll put a link to where I talked about it somewhere, and then, but you can't do that. It'll have to be changed. Well, I got news for you, people. I can do it. I did it, and I don't have to change it. And if you don't want to call it what I call it, I don't care. Call it a land shark. Say it wrong. Yes, wrong. I invented it. I spelled it. All right? I suppose all of you people, when going through Iowa, look for signs to go to Des Moines. And I could give you 100 other great examples of cities and locations around the United States that are not pronounced the way they're spelled. Wow. Blow my mind. Get over it. My God. Get over it. We're still coming out of a pandemic. There's a horrendous conflict going on in Ukraine. Our politics are a mess. And people are still devoting way too much time, in my humble opinion, arguing over 7 letters. It's Boule because I said it's Boule. Just like Des Moines is not Des Moines. Get over it, people. Find something serious to argue about. If that's all you got to argue about in 5th E, I don't think it's involving you enough. Get real. It just boggles my mind. They're going to have to change it. No. Go tell the people that live in that city in Iowa they got to go change their name because the way it's spelled and the way it's said doesn't make sense. Oh, yeah. Why don't you? The hubris. The hubris. They have to change it because... Well, when I see somebody that posts on there with a PhD in linguistics and ancient French Francophile studies or something, I'll sit down and I'll have an interesting conversation with them. In the meantime, people have the hubris to think it should be done something else. When I published it, B-O-O-L-A-Y. Boule. And you know what, folks, all that don't like the way I pronounce it, tough shit. I don't care. I really don't care. The fact that it makes you pucker when you run into one is all I care about. And if it doesn't, you either nerfed them or you're not playing them right. I made them to be a very nasty, hard to defeat, scary beast. And I pronounced it Boule. I think that ends everything I have for tonight. I believe this one will be a little longer than the last one. And remember, they get longer when I have more comments. And it doesn't have to be a comment on something said in this one. It can be a question relating to something gaming-wise. And I don't just talk about, I answer without being too boastful. I know lots about board gaming. I know lots about miniatures gaming. And not just role-playing, because I was a board gamer first, then a miniatures player, and came to role-playing third, last. So, give me something to talk about. And every Saturday morning, with your bowl of Captain Crunch, or Crunch Berries, or whatever super hyper sugary thing you do, or if you're a Cheerios person and believe in healthy breakfast, how healthy can it be watching the Curmudgeon in the Cellar? If you aren't a subscriber, please do. Dodatagovi.
Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine. He's the Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard's brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory, Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the Curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the Curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.